Hi there. In this video, we are going to see the detailed working of OAuth flow, its component with a sample example. Before starting the video, I would like to request you to watch the video completely for the better understanding. I have also provided the documentation of this video in the description below. So without getting delayed, let's get started. So for this video, I have taken an example of photo editing application, which will interact with our Google Photos, and this application provides us the facility of editing photo and adding different effects to it. So in our conventional flow, how it used to work, we need to provide our username and password to the third-party application. The third-party application in this example is our photo editing application. Now the third-party application need to store our credentials for the future use. Since we are using the third-party application in our daily use, we don't have to provide them our credentials again and again. So for that, the third-party application stores them. Now the server supports the password authentication, even though there are security concerns with this. Third-party application gains the complete access to the resource owner's protected resources, and there is no restrictions in the duration and access to the limited subset of the resources. Resource owner can't revoke the individual third-party application without revoking access to the all third-party applications, and that too they have to do it by changing their password. If any one of the application is compromised, in that case our resource password is compromised. So before getting into how OAuth flow works, we have to understand what is difference between OAuth 2 and OAuth 1. So OAuth 2 is the complete rewrite of the OAuth 1, and OAuth 2 is not backward compatible with OAuth 1 and 1.1. OAuth 2 introduces an additional authorization layer between the client and the resource owner. So if you see the roles, the client in OAuth 2 is known as consumer in OAuth 1. The resource owner in the OAuth 2 is known as user in OAuth 1. The resource server in OAuth 2 is known as service provider in OAuth 1. And we have an additional authorization server here. So OAuth 2 is the authorization protocol, but not an authentication protocol. It is designed for granting access to the limited set of resources. So the roles involved in OAuth 2 are the resource owner, the client, the authentication server, and the resource server. In this scenario, we are the resource owner who is having the access to the resource, that is our Google Photos. The photo editing application is known as the client, who will take our consent and then access the resources. Authorization server are the server which receives request from the client for the access token, and upon successful authentication they issues the access token to the clients. And the resource server are the server used to store our resources, for example our Google Photos. This is the overall flow of OAuth 2. We will see in detail with the example. So how does OAuth 2 work? So basically, client must acquire their own credentials, that is the client ID and the client secret, from the authorization server in order to identify themselves and authenticate themselves while making request for the access token. So for all this process, the client need to initiate the access request, either that be via mobile application, website, smart TV application, desktop application, etc. Now, in this case, our access request will be initiated by our photo editing application. The client will request authorization from the authorization server by supplying their client ID and client secret if required. And it also provides the scope and the redirect URL to send the authorization code. Now, authorization server authenticates the client and verifies that the requested scopes are permitted. The authorization server redirect back to the client with the authorization code. Now using this authorization code, access token is generated. Now with each of the request, the client will send the access token to access the resource from the resource server. In the process of application registration, we will require scope and the redirect URL, which we will discuss in the further slides. Here are different grant types included. You can go through each of them. I will be providing this in the documentation below. Now coming to the scopes. So scopes are the important concept of the OAuth 2. They are used to specify what are the resources that need to be granted and what are the level of access that a client can use. So for example, either we can read the Google Photos, or we can upload in the Google Photos, or we can even delete from the Google Photos. So coming to access token and authorization code. After a successful authentication, the authorization server sends the authorization code to the client on the redirect URL. So at the time of app registration, if we have provided our redirect URL as example.com/auth/callback, then post successful authentication, our code will be returned on our given redirect URL, that is example.com/auth/callback, and then in the query parameter we will be having our code, and if we have provided the state will also be received. So if you see in the Google, we do our app registration at console.cloud.google.com, and you can find the documentation in the provided documentation link. And our OAuth endpoint will look something like this, where we are having the scope, the response type, the state, the redirect URL, and the client ID. And in Microsoft, we do our app registration at portal.azure.com, and we can find the documentation in the link provided, and our authorization endpoint will look something like that. So here also we'll have the client ID, the response type, the redirect URI, the response mode, and there are a few additional query parameters provided. Now, if you see in this, we have an image showing the consent page. So once we are on the authorization endpoint, we will be able to see this consent page. Now, if we are not logged in, it will ask us to provide our login credentials, and then we will be able to see this page. And we can see the scopes which the client is trying to access. If you see with this example, first the resource owner, that is us, will request to our client, that is our photo editing application, and the client in turn request to the authorization server, that is it will go to the auth endpoints. Now in this, the authorization server will again show us the consent page, and in that it will ask us either to approve or to reject. So it will open the consent page to us. So the left one is for the Google consent page, and the right one is the Microsoft consent page. Now once we grant the consent, it will return authorization code to the client. So we have now our redirect URL with the code. Now using the code, we can request token, and if the code is valid, then it will return us the token. And also one thing to be noted is the code is one time use only. So if we are using code to generate token, so next time we can't use the same code to generate the tokens. So once token is generated, token will look something like this. And with each of the requests to the resource server, we will be using the access token, not the refresh, not the ID token, but the access token. Now, since access tokens are the short-lived token and the refresh tokens are the long-lived tokens, so we can also see the token type and the expiration time. So it will expire in 1 hour, that is 3599 second from the time it is generated. So once the token is generated, then what you will do? So you will be using the refresh token to get a new access token, and then you will be using the new access token for accessing the resources. Now once we have the token now in our hand, so in that case, the client will store the tokens, the access token and the refresh token, and then whenever now resource owner request for the photos that need to be edited, the client request the resource server with the token, and The resource server in turn validate the token from the authorization server, and the authorization server responds back with the validation response, and based on that the resource server responds to the client, and the client will be able to access the images now. So this is the entire flow of the OAuth 2. Now, after the implementation of OAuth 2, do we really need to share our username and password to the third-party application? So the answer is no, because it has shifted to authorization server where we don't have to provide our credentials to third-party application. Instead, we will directly interact with our authorization server to authorize the request. Does third-party application still need to store the credentials for future references? No. Instead, they will be storing the access tokens, refresh tokens. And does server require to support password authentication? So the answer is no, because OAuth 2 is more than sufficient now. Does third-party app gain complete access to the resource? So the answer is no, because the scope comes into the picture where we can restrict only the limited resources. Can resource owner revoke access to individual third-party app without revoking access to all third-party? Yes, because every third-party applications, they will have to register themselves in the authorization server, and they will be getting their unique client ID and client secrets. So if we want, we can revoke token for one of the third-party application without making any impact on the others. So will compromise of one third-party app results in compromise of resource password? So no, because we are not using it anymore. And then if any of the third-party application is even being compromised, only our tokens will be compromised, and that too we can revoke it at any point of time. So that's all for the video. I hope the things are a bit clear now. If you have any doubt, please comment down below. And if you like the video, please do like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.